Hello everybody. We are picking up in chapter 12 where we left off last time, and if you have a recollection of where we got to, we ran into problems, and some of the people here in class were able to get their app to work at this kind of midpoint in chapter 12, or maybe 2/3 of the way through chapter 12, and some of us not. And thank you to Erin, who shared her code with me so I could help troubleshoot my own. And we find that this code basically is kind of weird and buggy, right? That some of us are having this effect where sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and the question is why. And the first thing I want to do is I want to point out a couple of things to you, and also want to explain to you why I ask for screenshots with these assignments, right? Because if you guys are coding a Java program, Java has this wonderful feature about it where no matter where you write that code, I could write it on my phone, you name a computer system, I can take that code, move it to any other computer system that has Java installed on it, and it will run. And that's the whole point of Java. .NET code, folks, is not like that at all. It is highly dependent on the environment you're working in, your file and folder structure, what tools you have installed, and how your tools are interacting with Visual Studio. So the thing I was pointing out to the class here earlier is if you are using SQL Server, the full-blown product, on your machine, Visual Studio will prefer to use that for your databases over the internal SQL Server Express that comes with Visual Studio. By the same token, if you have IIS, Internet Information Services, or Microsoft's web server software included with all versions of Windows since XP, at least the Pro versions, that's also going to be preferred by Visual Studio. If you have that product, the full-blown IIS running over the internal IIS Express, which you see right up here in my toolbar. So you notice when I hit my play button, it launches the internal one, because I don't run IIS on my machine with intent. I don't need it. I don't want my machine to be a web server, right? But some of you probably have both SQL Server and IIS running on your machines, in which case, when you save your project and launch your code, it's launching to those internal products that are on your machine. So if you pick up your project and you move it somewhere else, or if you zip it and submit it to me as homework, and I try to open it, but you were using SQL Server and you were using IIS, the full-blown product, through a text editor if I have to, or Visual Studio, but that way I can confirm that you actually got the work done. So if you guys want to know why we do that, those are the types of reasons why we do that. Now, I was having this effect last week where my stuff wasn't working. Erin shared her code. And with that code, I was able to do some side-by-side comparisons of my old code and look for mistakes. And I'll tell you what, when you look at one person's code and compare it to your own code, looking for one character that's off, right? It's not an easy thing to do visually. So, but I did find a mistake in my code, and that was here in the @themovies.js file, which is in the client scripts folder. And this is the mistake I found right here. I had typed ng-route, like this. And notice I put it into a comment here because I wanted to see it in the aftermath so I could point it out to you guys easily. Now, if you're curious, what is ng-route? Well, ng-route is actually a function and in part of the Angular.js libraries. So it has to be called exactly this for it to work, otherwise it won't work. So when I was going to my browser and I was running the product here, I would hit the play button and the browser would launch as it is now. It would take a few moments, the application would load up, and I wouldn't get the results, the list of the movies like I was expecting. In fact, let's give it a moment and see if it does load up. All right, and this is basically what it was getting. And isn't it interesting what the URL looks like in the output? Now, if you guys, did you notice what just happened? Here I was ready to type something else in because I'm impatient, right? And that's really kind of the point here, is it did load up. But I kept trying and trying and trying earlier today to fix this, and I would go into inspect mode, because I know there's JavaScript running here in the background, folks, right? So I would go to the console, and the console was just lit up with errors. And one of the errors that was popping up, and I showed it to class, and I probably should have screen captured it or something, but it would point out that little snippet of JavaScript code that we were seeing here that said ng route, it was throwing an error on that, and I was like, hold on a second, I just saved this, right? And why the heck is it causing problems? So, being the problem solver that I am, knowing I'm working with .NET, the first thing I did, of course, was I went to my project node, did a right click, and then you do a clean, and then you do a build, or you can just do a rebuild, which does both. And I would run it again, and I would still come up with the same problem. And then it dawned on me, just as class was starting, that what I really needed to do while I was still in this inspect mode, with the inspect panel open, was to come up to the refresh button here, press and hold your mouse down, and this only works if the inspect panel is active. And I know it works in Firefox, and I know it works in Chrome. I don't know about Safari and Edge. But notice a regular reload, same as Control R or F5. So a regular reload will load things up from the browser cache if things are there. And whenever you're working with Angular libraries, jQuery libraries, all that stuff's there. So I opted for a hard reload, and by choosing that, all of a sudden I got the list to show up. So that was telling me that the results I was seeing on my screen were cached in memory, and I wasn't really seeing the results. So make sure you try that. As a last-ditch effort, you can always do the empty the cache and hard reload. I'm not always a fan of doing that unless I absolutely have to. And I did that on one of my machines this week, because what happens if you're used to browsing with your cache populated with all this stuff, you get a pretty fast browsing experience, and all of a sudden you blow everything away, and all of a sudden everything's taking a long time again. So use that one with caution, but try this one if you're not getting that list up on the screen. But you are seeing now that I am getting that list up on the screen. What we're getting as a kind of like a secondary effect right now is, hypothetically, we should be able to click on like one of these detail views and pull those details in. And what we should see is the name of the movie released in the year, and then minutes long, preceded by a number, right? That's how the code's set up. So what we're going to do now is we're going to return to the book and work on the code to try to make this work, and then with any luck, finish off the chapter. Okay? So I know this one's kind of been a little bit challenging, for me included, because of the way that all these technologies kind of interact with each other, but hopefully a couple of the tips I gave you will be enough to help you kind of clear some of the problems that you're having. And I'm just looking at my comments in the chat window here because I am running a live session there as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the browser at this point and get that off the screen. But these are things that you guys should keep in mind as you're working. The other interesting thing that you should also know, which I've been kind of getting used to this because I've been teaching my last section of Ruby on Rails, where we launched like command line web server software. And as that web server software is running and you hit a page in your browser, the web server software runs in the console window and shows you all the stuff that's going on, every page that's requested, every file that's loaded, the response time, any error messages before they even hit the screen, they'll come up there. And Visual Studio, if you notice, has the same thing happening in the output window. So whenever you hit that button and make it play, in the background, the console is keeping track of all the stuff that you're doing in the browser window. And guess what? Any website that you go to, they're doing the same thing. They're looking at all the pages you're loading. And the reason they do that is not just to build, data on you. That's not really the main purpose. It's really more to troubleshoot problems. And like I said, sometimes when you're sitting there waiting for the browser, it's like, come on already, load up the page, right? You can come over here to the console window while that's happening, especially if you have two screens, and watch what's going on. It'll show you what it's trying to load up, what's working, what's not working. So maybe if something's not loading, it'll say, error finding blah, 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 and maybe that'll help you track the problem down. So that's why these things exist. So I just want you to be aware, and don't be afraid to use the tools to help you troubleshoot. All right, so I'm going to the PDF now, and this is where I kind of found that one problem. So this is kind of the point I backtracked to. So I've noticed, and you guys will have to kind of help guide me here, that some of the things that I have in my code don't exactly match up with some of the things that they have in their code, yet everything still seems to work. Let me give an example as to what I'm talking about here. This is a really good example. In this atthemovies.js file, and just to kind of reiterate where we are in our project, that's in the client scripts folder. That's scripts that we generated from the book, right, from the examples. I notice here, like, I'm doing everything in lowercase, right? One of my students who turned in some code had some of the things in uppercase, but apparently still was able to get it to work. And then I don't know if you guys tried it in the browser or not, but like capital M, lowercase m, capital L, lowercase l, and it all still kind of seemed to work, which is kind of strange, right? Because everything you're taught about web design is like one character's off and nothing's working. So there's a little bit of interpolation that happens here in a .NET environment, and also with the Angular engine that we're using in JavaScript that helps to kind of correct some of those things and automatically adjust them. So some of the case sensitivity seems to not be a factor. The other thing that I've noticed as well, aside from my misspelling here, is if you start to poke through some of these other files, like for example, if you look at your details controller, and I want you guys to just do that for me right now, and then take a look at this little segment right here. So that URL, where it's API/movie. And if you remember the last time we ran just that URL, like one of the first things we did, it would come back either as a JSON file or an XML, and it would come back plural, right? So if we look at the code in the book now, when we get to that point, and that's here in the details view. So we're gonna review these files, and I don't mean to like jump around too much, but I notice here that this is singular. Let me ask you guys, is yours singular?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Why?
Because I changed it. I noticed when we ran it in the browser that it came up API/movies plural.
So you changed it, but did it work?
It works as well as yours.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Ouch. Yes, it works as well as mine does right now. But you know what? We're working on it, and this is kind of like the rite of passage here. All right, so here's our task. I'm going to kind of backtrack to the top of this details section, and I know that I've done this work already, but seeing how I made a mistake before with something that, just a dash and a capital R, and that was enough to throw it off, it really is worth going back and just working on this. And I will confess, I spent a couple hours this afternoon trying to solve this problem, and it wasn't until I walked into the classroom, right, with the pressure of the students looking at me, that I was like, of course, a hard reload. Why didn't I think of that, right? So that's kind of how life goes sometimes, folks. All right, let's begin by looking at the details view. And this particular little bit of HTML this is all going to go into a view file. So if you guys remember where we put that, if you come down here and look at details.html, this is where you're going to find that code. So they kind of go through two versions of it here. And I see a couple of things, right? So the first thing that they were showing us is what we were doing in the list controller. So this code here is not necessarily code we have to put in. Can you guys agree with that? Mm-hmm. Right? But as we move down, we have to create that file, which we already have. That's the one we're looking at on our screen. And here's where we have to make sure that everything is correct. So please go through, just like I am, double check all your code, all your syntax, and make sure that's all spot on. All right. This code to me looks okay. So yours is good? Okay. So we'll call the HTML file fine. All right. From there, we're going to move into the actual controller file, which when we're working with Angular.js, and if you guys haven't picked up on this yet, you know, the fact that we're creating controllers now, but we're using a different technology right inside of .NET. So, and this is a movement that's happening out in the field. Everything seems to be switching over to JavaScript. But they don't want to lose this capability of the model view controller, so they're just building it into the web API format, and Angular has tools built in that does all of that for us, so that's why that's a really popular tool for doing it. All right, so let's go to the controller now. So details controller.js, and here that is up on my screen. Get the PDF back up here, and attempting to do a little kind of like side by side here. So let's do a little bit of comparison. So please check your own code, just the way I'm checking mine. And we're looking for even the slightest variance of syntax. And truthfully, there should be no variance, right? Because I copy pasted it. That would be the thought. So basically at this point, I'm just verifying that everything is okay. How's your code, folks? Okay? Okay, if you made any changes, make sure you save those changes. And yes, I'm scrolling back up because I'm checking something. Just got to make sure. All right. Lastly, we have to go back to the index.cshtml file and make sure that we have a call to the controller for details. So let's bring that file up. And that's going to be down in the views folder under home. There's our index.cshtml. And it looks like I do have a call to it. The other thing that we want to check, we're assuming that this part is all okay. You know what? I'm not going to take it on faith. Yes, I'm scrolling back up to find it. Right, and at some point we change this, and that's the spot I'm looking for. Right here. This is the part where we changed it, right? So this is what the home page should look like. So everything looks okay. So back down to where we were. And then what should happen, right, which didn't happen before the last time I looked, was that this should load up. And I want you to notice that you can type in that URL and go directly to it, but if you let it just load up, there's that details link that follows, and that should work. However, I want you this time that if it happens not to work, and maybe you've already tried this because I warned you, try to do that, go into inspect mode, hard refresh, or hard reload, whatever they're calling it, and see if that fixes it. So let's let it load up first. Crossing fingers here. Okay, so was that like 5 seconds after the page loaded? But it did load up the details view. I'm going to go to Star Wars. Yeah, and it seems to not be working. Now, I am going to right-click, go into inspect mode, and we did this before. I'm going to the console, and notice it said fail to load resource. The server responded with a status of API movie 1, right? So what you got to remember, when we just called API movies, right, or movie, and it switched automatically to movies, it would pull back the whole serialized list. What we're really asking it to do now is to pull back one single movie, the one that has the ID of 1, and then put that on the screen. So what I'm going to try to do right now is I'm going to try to do the hard reload right here. Okay. Did you notice that I got a different message now on the screen? Regardless, though, it still didn't work, right? Did anybody's work here in class? Yours worked.
Yeah.
And it's been working all along?
No, it didn't work until I did that hard reload.
Okay.
Because I kept wondering why. I had everything that was correct, but it wouldn't display.
All right. Now I'm going to hit my back button, and I'm going to try one of the other movies. Once again, I'm going to do a hard reload. And notice, because I know that list took a few seconds to pop up, I figure maybe I should wait a couple seconds. You know, I can talk for a minute and see if, like, all of a sudden it says, you know, movie title in minutes and released in. But I'm still not getting the results. Let's try it with the other movie.
Well, the only other thing that I could see that I did different than you was put an X in that movie.
Okay, and Tom, that's kind of where I'm going to. Is that the difference? And that could very well be.
You're about to find out.
Now, the thing I find fascinating about this is this, right? If we go to the root of the application, and now that it's all loaded up in memory, you see how quickly it responds? The fact that it is pulling back these titles means that it is interacting with the database, and the information is in the database, for sure, right? We just need to get it up on the screen. What I also like to do, just to play on the safe side, first of all, I'm going to close the browser. Let's stop the application from running. We can also go into our Server Explorer. So mine happens to be down here. Yours might be over here somewhere in the left sidebar. And if you don't see it at all, just come up to View, and then go into Server Explorer. What we're looking for here are basically the databases and since it's not coming up for me automatically, now I'm bringing up the SQL Server Object Explorer. And there it finally loaded. And I'm going to expand this. And really what I'm trying to do is I want to make sure that my local database has the movies data. So you notice all the databases that we've worked on in the class. But we're working on at the movies 2 models. And then I'm going to right click that and we're going to actually take a look. So let's look at the properties first. All right, nothing to worry about there. Then let's go into the tables, and once we're into the tables that we've created, we should be able to view the data and bring it up on screen, right? And then here's what I'm basically working on is I want to confirm that the ID actually matches up with something, right? So that we're not clicking details 1 and it's pulling up the wrong thing. If you wanted to make it more interesting, of course you could add as many movies as you want here, but clearly the data's in the database. You guys are all okay there too? Okay, because I think that's pretty critical. All right, I'm going to switch myself back to Solution Explorer at this point. I'm pretty satisfied that it's not my database. So now we're going to take that thing that we were talking about, and Tom, where you used the plural for movies was in which file?
The detail controller.
It was in the details controller. So Tom is saying that he put an S in this spot and he's getting it to work. So you know what? It's worth trying, right? But here's what I want you to do as you're going to try this. Drop the S in, do a Control S to save, and then I suggest, even though I know it's probably not required in this case, that you come up here, right-click the project node, and do a rebuild. That rebuild will go through and recompile any of the code that needs to be compiled and turned into a binary, which succeeded, and you see it was only one file. We got one DLL file. Right, let's go ahead and try to run this again. And if that fixes it, hooray. Maybe it'll be just that simple. Probably half the time of this video is waiting for the web server to launch. Tom, you're good?
Yeah.
That is taking its sweet time, isn't it? Now, of course, if you saw how many processes I had running in the background, I'm doing some video rendering in the background right now, too. And again, watch that browser web server output window as it pops up messages. All right, and then we're going to wait a second because we know the list is going to pop up. Yay! All right, now we're going to be brave and click one of the details links, and hopefully it will be an epic failure after we do a hard, no, that regular reload doesn't work. So let's go into inspect mode, press and hold, do a hard reload, and yay! All right, so as primitive as that was, we did get it to work. All right, but it shows you the importance of really, you know, stuff is in your cache and it gets stuck that way. So what it's telling you is the way the .NET engine works in the background. and you're not controlling it. I know that we can write our own code to cache things, but what it's telling you is the .NET engine is automatically caching content in your browser cache. And unless you do that hard reload, it's always going to load up the JavaScript file that it already loaded that had a mistake in it. So that's a lesson learned. And you know what? It's a lesson learned for me as well. And I think what would be really good to do right now is we're going to take a 5-minute break. So we took a little break here in class, and after coming back from class, we went through and did some troubleshooting to make sure that everybody's code was working here in class. And collectively, putting all our heads together and trying all the different things we know how to do, we did actually figure it out. So everybody here in the classroom has a successful working program, at least as successful as mine. And you know, it's all the little things. And one thing that we found that was a difference, that seemed to make the difference for a person who was having the issue, was in the controllers folder. We have this movies controller, and notice mine is named plural, and she had named hers with a singular, which of course then changed the necessity of this S in this position. So that's really, I think it's fascinating to note. So whatever that's worth. All right, let's move on to the next part of the book. We don't have a lot of time left here in class, but I feel now that we got our heads wrapped around, you know, the first portions of this pretty well. Now we need to create another JavaScript file in the client folder, and this one will be called movie service. Notice movie singular service.js. So let's go ahead and start doing that. I'm going to move this over to the other screen here while we do it, and I'm going to be copying code over. So let's get that full screen. If your server is running, you do want to stop it at this point. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on the client scripts folder. I'm going to do an add, and we're going to choose JavaScript file. And of course, we're going to call this movie service.js. Inside this file, we're going to paste in the code found on page 375.
You want anyone posting that to your other people to see?
Oh yes, sharing my screen? Yeah, I sure can. So I'm being reminded here that I forgot my etiquette of sharing my screen here in class and to the online people, so I'm sorry about that. So here's what I'm doing. I'm grabbing this code. This is page 375. So I'm going to grab all this code in the middle here and paste it into Visual Studio in this newly created file. With any good fortune here, it'll all paste in beautifully. Apparently not so much. And it looks like my PDF reader's going into not responding mode. It's just very slow to copy it to the clipboard, so hopefully I didn't I'm not pasting in the whole PDF here. That would be not pretty. All right, once you got the stuff pasted in, go ahead and do a Control S to save. And when I did my paste here, I did it with preserve the formatting, so I wouldn't have to do all the indents, but then it added extra line feeds, so now here I am cleaning them up. And the only reason I'm really doing this is the code being more concise is a little bit easier to read. And as you're kind of making these like silly little tweaks that I'm doing right now, you can also kind of look at the stuff you're tweaking and see how it turned out. So this stuff, of course, is formatted like this. And then notice that really what we're doing is we're just putting in the functionality to kind of look at all that information and do all the CRUD operations. And this is basically going to extend the capabilities of our movie controller, or movies controller, depending on how you named it. And notice, if you, let's actually go to the movie controller really quick and take a look. This particular file right now being a C# file, right, which is the way we started learning this MVC stuff, and we have our database declaration in here, but beyond that, we also have all the basic CRUD things going on too, meaning we have a get to retrieve the information, we have a put in there, we also have a post, so if you're sending stuff back, a delete if you're removing things, or destroy. And really what we're doing is the CRUD operations are built in there. Now this new file that we just created, wherever the heck it went, right there, it's basically mimicking those same functions using more of the traditional CRUD terminology. So create, retrieve, update, destroy. And what the author says here, it's mimicking the server-side API, but because we're doing it with JavaScript, this is happening in the browser. That's what's notable here. It's all happening in the browser. Why is this like something that people are even interested in doing? Because by doing it in the browser, you're taking the load off of the server, and that's right, Tom, speed and efficiency, because it's just really a simple JavaScript file. All right. The next thing that we need to do is we need to make a little bit of an adjustment to our at the movies script file, and that is at the very bottom we need to add another little thing. So we're going to add a app.constant, and I'm not copy pasting this, I'm actually typing it in, and we're putting in movie API URL, like so, and comma separated values, and then the path, which is API / movie singular in this case, with a backslash following it. There should be a semicolon at the end of the line. Then go ahead and do a Control S to save, and all my little green underlines went away. So you guys got that in there okay? Now, of course, we just added another JavaScript file, so we have to go back to our index view. So that's down in the Views Home folder. And we have to add a call to it. Now, remember, the simple way to do this is you can just come over here and drag and drop it in, and it just adds it automatically. And of course, the advantage of that, always remember, is the fact that there's no typos that way. It's not cheating. It looks like none of the other stuff changed here in the index view, so do another Control S to save. And then we need to go over to the list controller and make some edits there. So jumping over to the list controller, here's where you want to proceed with some caution. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come out of full screen mode with Visual Studio and try to share a little bit of screen space if it will only let me. And I know you guys are capable of copy pasting on your own. Sometimes it's fun to watch somebody else do it too. Alright, so notice we're going to be changing quite a bit here. So all the stuff that we have inside this first section, well, not all of it, but a good portion of it is going to be slightly different. So the first line, var list controller function, the scope remains, but now instead of using the HTTP service, we're using the one that we created called movie service. And then instead of doing an HTTP GET where we're calling something that's built into that service that we had before, now we're just referring to our own service, movie service. And then we're going to add a line here which is dot get all with parens, and then the success portion looks like it stays the same. Movies is plural there. Looks like app controller, list controller, that's all the same. And the Angular module is fine. So Control S to save that one once it looks like that. And then we need to move on to the details controller and make some similar tweaks. Just want to make sure I can see all of it. All right, so once again, route params is going to stay, but HTTP is going to go away. And in its place, once again, instead of HTTP, but we're putting it at the end this time, not in the middle, is movie service. Check all the rest of it. Route params ID, that's the same. Here, once again, we're going to be switching away from this approach to movie service. On the next line, we're going to do dot get by ID, and then we're going to pass a parameter, of course, of ID. And I suspect the rest of it will remain unchanged, and that is the case. So go ahead and save that as well. Next thing that we need to do is set it up so that we can actually do some deleting. And I know we're getting really close to the end of the chapter here, so I really kind of wish we could just plow through and finish, but I don't know if we'll get to that point. So I think we'll work on this next little tidbit, and then I'm going to have to kind of cut the strings and let you guys finish up on your own. You guys feel pretty confident now that you can probably overcome any problems? Or feel more confident? Maybe I shouldn't say any. All right. All right, so what we need to do now is to go to the list view, which means to the list HTML file. That's this one here. And we need to change some things. So you see the first line is going to remain unchanged. With the table tag, they're adding a class, which is table. That's an interesting one. First TD stays the same. Okay, and the second TD is where all the changes are. So we're going to put in, we're going to revise our link. So we're going to copy that, which is going to replace this. I mean, it's essentially doing the same thing. But what it is doing is it is adding a class definition to it. And what it's really doing is it's pulling up the stylings from Bootstrap. It's also providing a link there with that particular thing in, just like it did before. But then we're also adding in button code. So we're dropping in a button right inside the same cell. Once again, notice the Bootstrap elements and the Angular elements kind of working together. Make sure you save that, folks, if you haven't already. All right, so now the point of this is to kind of improve our view a little bit. It's probably okay to actually run the web server now, and hopefully we'll get what we see on the next page. So let's go ahead and just run it And if this works, we'll call it a night. And if it doesn't work, we'll also call it a night. All right, here comes the browser. Well, that's horribly ugly. So that's horribly ugly because we didn't finish our work is really what happened, right? Okay. So, but we do have a button. All right. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so I'm going to encourage you guys to keep working on this on your own. I did change the due dates, and remember that I have this policy on this stuff that turn in what you have by the due date, and then you can finish it up without a late penalty, so please take advantage of that. I just want to see that you're actively working on it. And when we come back next time, we should be able to finish this and work on the next exercise as well, whose due date has also been adjusted. All right, folks, that's it.